So I am very excited to welcome and introduce you all to Sandy Ballard, who is the Public Services Coordinator for the Dauphin County Bar Association. So thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Ashley. The Dauphin County Bar Association and MidPenn Legal Services are very happy to partner with the Dauphin County Library System because the libraries are such wonderful community centers, especially during COVID, and provide such a resource to everyone in terms of information. And we just love this idea of working with libraries so that lawyers can share legal information and make that more broadly available. So that if you have questions about a particular topic or interested in the future, let us know or let the library know, and we'll try to look for we have 1,500 attorneys here that are members of our association here in the Harrisburg area. So I'm sure we can find one or two to talk on many different topics. And I'm very, very happy to introduce Ed Spreha, partner of the law firm of Wagner Spreha. Ed is a former president of the Dauphin County Bar Association. He is also a former pro bono lawyer of the year, and that is very dear to my heart because I coordinate our pro bono or volunteer projects. Ed came to me with an idea and we worked on it together, and we have been over the last few years offering a similar presentation like you'll be hearing tonight, followed by one-on-one kind of Q&A sessions with an attorney. And we've been working with Careerlink, which is a program that helps people who are looking for work. As many of you might know, if you don't have an active driver's license, it's very hard to get a job and keep a job here in Harrisburg area. We have public transit, but it's not like the big city where it's available any hour of the day. So we understand that people need their driver's license to work. And we were delighted when Ed was able to help people restore their driver's license or perhaps try a couple of the alternatives that might be available. And I want to welcome you, I think it was Barbara and Moses, maybe it's not. I'm not pronouncing that first name right. It's not quite Moses. There's an extra Moyes. Maybe it's Moyes. I'm not sure, but welcome. We're glad to have you. And so now I also wanted to mention our future programs. April 29th, starting at 5:30. We're going to move it up a little bit, 5:30. We're going to have two wonderful staff attorneys from MidPenn Legal Services, which is the local legal aid office for low-income individuals. And that will be Lindsay Conforto and Pamela Fleck, who will be joining us to talk about how to handle custody conflicts. In particular, custody has also been very difficult during COVID and working out those arrangements. So we hope you can join us April 29th at 5:30. On May 27th, we'll be learning about Pennsylvania unemployment insurance. And that is also a hot topic with COVID. The unemployment benefits have been increased, but it's so confusing. I can't keep up with it. So I'm sure it's hard for many people out there to keep up with it. And for that program, we have the managing attorney at MidPenn Legal Services, Nick Matash. So we are very glad to have those programs coming up. And then June 24th, again at 5:30, we hope to have a presentation on divorce and why breaking up is so hard to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ed. Thank you so much, Ed, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Sandy, and thanks for everyone turning out tonight. And we'll see if people join us throughout the course of the presentation. We are recording this, so some of the things I'm going to be talking about is going to be a little more specific to certain situations that may not apply to you in attendance, but that's why because we're recording it, we want to make sure we cover as many bases as we can. What we started a few years ago, as Sandy mentioned, was a driver's license restoration clinic. because we found there are many people in the Harrisburg area who had suspended licenses and may not have known what, why they were suspended or what needed to be done. If you've ever tried to navigate customer service at Penndot, it can be difficult, especially during the last year with COVID, with the quarantine, with many people working from home. It wasn't easy to track down a individual who could assist you. So over the last couple of years, what we come up with this program is we've had people come in, and it's going to be something I may be able to discuss with the people in attendance tonight also at the end with specific circumstances. But we've assisted those people in attempting to get some sort of driver's license. Again, as Sandy mentioned, Central Pennsylvania without a driver's license, it's difficult to get transportation, difficult to get around, and therefore often difficult to maintain employment. So we're trying to help people get on track. One of the things I always tell people when they come to the driver's license clinics is that we're not miracle workers. We still have to deal with the law. We still have to deal with your particular situation and how PennDOT applies it. But there are times where people just aren't sure what needs to be done, and we can push them in the right direction, give them a roadmap, and help them find out what may be available to them in as far as getting some sort of probationary license or getting fully restored. And one of the things we do is whenever people come in, the first things we do, and I'm going to share the screen, so bear with me here whenever I bounce over here, is we have individuals get what's called a restoration requirements letter. And I'm going to pull this up on my screen right now, and that's what's listed right here. If you go to PennDOT's website, and you can see just dmv.pa.gov at the top of my screen, there's an entire section on driver licensing. And one of the most important things over here on the right side of the screen is the area that says request your restoration requirements letter. And this is the first thing we always start with whenever people come into our clinics is we get a copy of their restoration requirements letter. So if you're watching and you're at home watching this, I would advise go and click on this link. When you click on this link, you'll see you need three things: your driver's license number, the date of birth, and the last four digits of your social security number. And when you put in the date of birth and those information, you click on the links down here, and this won't work for me because I'm not suspended. But when you click on this, log in, it's going to come up with what's called a restoration requirements letter. That restoration requirements letter is going to contain information that details what a person needs to complete in order to have their license restored. And that's, I'm going to jump back here. I'll be back in a second, but here we go. Okay. But when you pull up your restoration requirements letter, it's a roadmap to getting restored. And anything that is outstanding that needs to be completed before PennDOT will give you your license back is going to be listed on that letter. And there are certain things you're going to see. One of the first things is often having to pay a restoration fee. Anytime someone's suspended, in order to be restored, they have to pay a restoration fee. And that fee varies depending on the nature of the suspension. But a restoration fee has to be paid, proof of insurance, either that the vehicle you're going to be driving is insured or the fact that you don't own a vehicle that needs to be insured, but that's a requirement. And then there's other things that will often show up on that restoration letter that need to be taken care of. If you're currently suspended, every single suspension that you're serving will be listed and the time of suspension. And one of the most important things I should have started with is at the very top of that restoration requirements letter is going to be something called an eligibility date. That's the date you're eligible to be fully restored. So if you comply with everything in that restoration letter, then you will be restored by the date listed in the top. If you pull your restoration letter and you don't see an eligibility date, that means there's some other issues that need to be resolved before PennDOT will give you with that date. For instance, if there's outstanding judgments against you, if you're involved in an auto accident and you were sued and you owe money, you won't see an eligibility date until that's paid. If you have unpaid fines and costs, either at the clerk of courts or at the local district judge's office, you won't see an eligibility date. If there's failure to respond, suppose you got a ticket and then you threw the ticket away, you forgot about it, and a judge issued a failure to respond to that ticket, that'll be an outstanding indefinite suspension. But these will be listed on that restoration letter. Other things that are issued on that restoration letter, you might see a couple things. If you are serving a suspension. Yes, Sandy.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. So you're saying if I get a traffic ticket and I ignore it, I am at risk of getting my license suspended for that?
For traffic tickets, yes, because what will happen is if you get a traffic ticket, you have to either enter a plea of guilty or not guilty and have a hearing. Or if you plead guilty, no hearings required. If you don't do anything, the judge's office will send you what's called a DL-38, a failure to respond notice. And they'll warn you, if you don't respond, we're going to suspend you. Suppose you plead guilty and the judge puts you on a payment plan and you fail to stay active with that payment plan. Well, then they'll also suspend you for failing to respond. Now, the judge's office will always send out a notice letting you know ahead of time before they do it, give you a chance to respond. But sometimes people move. Sometimes mail gets lost or mail gets delayed like we're dealing with now. So there are times where people just don't get the notices. If they move, forget to notify PennDOT, they get separated, divorced. Those are types of things where we see people sometimes don't always catch up, get the mail caught up with them. See a lot of college students who may list a college address and then move back home and the mail gets sent to the college address. These types of things often result in these failure to respond, and those are indefinite suspensions. Now, the nice thing about those is they're easy to remedy. All you have to do is make a phone call or write a letter to the judge, and you can get that taken care of pretty quickly. So those are the ones we like to see because they're quick. Yes, Andy.
But what if you are a college student and they send it to your old, college apartment that, you can barely live in, and you never get that mail and you're driving around? You could be driving on a suspended license and not know it.
It happens quite frequently, actually, yes. Yeah, I have a lady coming to see me in a couple of weeks, and that's exactly the case. She's a nurse. She's a nurse's aide. She needs to drive. She's a traveling nurse, and she had a ticket that she was not aware of until she got pulled over and told, "Oh, you're suspended." So fortunately, we have a good defense because a defense knowledge is an element. They need to prove you knew. Oh. And we do have a good defense for her. So we should be successful with her case. But PennDOT takes the view that you have an obligation to notify them when you move. And if you fail to do it, then that's your problem.
Wow. Well, thank you.
But there is still a defense in court for that.
Yeah. And so roughly if you don't have a good defense, what's the rough fine for driving on a suspended license?
Starts at $200 plus costs, and multiple offenses, the fine could be up to $1,000. So that does get expensive.
Thanks.
But these are the types of issues. I was going to mention, if you're suspended for a DUI, there are things you need to do in order to have your license restored. One is you need to complete drug and alcohol counseling. It's called Act 122. So if you pull up a restoration letter and you see that there's an Act 122 requirement, and it says that, Act 122, that means that you need to complete your drug and alcohol treatment. And there's a paragraph that follows that explains it a little bit better. But you need to make sure your drug and alcohol treatment's completed. Otherwise, that will delay your restoration. If you have a DUI, there's something called an Act 151. It's called a Prison Release Requirement Act. And that indicates that anytime someone gets sentenced for a DUI, their suspension doesn't start until they get released from jail. Well, most people don't go to jail for first and second offense DUIs. However, probation still has to notify PennDOT that they never went to jail. Otherwise, it will show up as a pending Act 151 on that restoration letter. But the advice I give to people in situations where they're suspended and they may not know what they need to do, and I'm going to go back to share my screen again, is to go to this website I'm about to pop up. And I'm going to stay on the share screen because there are a few other things I want to go over here. But the most important thing that you can do is go to, and I'm going to back up this link, scroll down into the area, and you can just search for this, but request your restoration letter. Because once you type in your driver's license number, your date of birth, and the last four, and then click on the CAPTCHAs and everything else, you will get a copy. Now you have to click through a few more screens to order it. It's free. This is one thing that's nice about the restoration letter, is it's free, and you don't have to pay for it like a driving record, and you can pull this up as many times as you want. So suppose you look at your restoration letter and you realize that there's more that needs to be done in order to be restored. It's not just a matter of paying an old fine or restoration fee, that you have suspensions that may last a couple of years. What else could be done? Well, there's a few other things that can be done. For instance, an occupational license. If you go to PennDOT's website, there's a search link right up in the top right of your form where you can click on an occupational license. And there's some information about that. There's an occupational limited license FAQ. You can click on this. And this is where you can get all your questions answered, because unfortunately for occupational licenses, there are very few violations that are eligible for this. In fact, if you click what type of violations are not eligible, you'll see that failure to respond, driving under suspensions, chemical test refusals, if you get a DUI, driving without insurance, passing a school bus, racing on highways, fleeing a police officer, reckless driving, and of course, DUIs. So an occupational license is rarely beneficial because if you go through here, you just see there's so few violations that make people eligible. But if you are potentially eligible, what you can do is on Penndot's website, there's an occupational limited license petition. And again, this is available on Penndot's website. You can click on it for free, and you can see what needs to be done when you fill out this occupational license application. It's all your basic information, the vehicle that you're going to be driving, as well as the insurance for the vehicle that you're going to be driving. And then down below is information, because an occupational license is available for work, as you can see, employer, school, or medical treatment. So if you're a student, if you need medical treatment, or if you have a job, you can get an occupational license if your violations qualify. And you really need to compare the FAQ sheet to see if your violations qualify. But then down below, you explain why you need it, why it's vital, then you sign it, and then there's a checklist. This is always important, this checklist here, because you make sure you have proof of insurance, the restoration fee, the application fee, and then send it, and this is key, by certified mail to that address. They will not let you, at least they say they won't let you hand deliver these. It's easy when we're in Harrisburg because people across the state, it's not as easy as it is for us just to walk on down to the Riverfront Office Center or local driver's licensing center, but we can't drop it off. And then there's information on it about the different instructions for completing it, as well as violations that qualify and don't. Actually, they're not on this sheet. Now, the other aspect of an occupational license is there's an affidavit. As you can see, you need to carry this with you. Once Penndot gives you that occupational license, you need to carry this with you. So if you're ever pulled over by the police, you can show them that you are driving the vehicle that's listed, you have insurance, and it's important is they want to know your work schedule. Who do you work for and when would you be driving? And you can see how you can fill out this work driving schedule over here with the various aspects of when you leave home, when you arrive at work. Now, of course, most of us, myself, I'm not just drive to my office at 8 o'clock, drive home at 5. I'm driving all over central Pennsylvania, going to different courtrooms. So there are places where down below you can fill out, well, not much, but right there, detailed explanation. I can fill in, I drive frequently going to courthouse, whatever it may be. Same thing with driving for school, driving for work, or for medical treatment. And you'll notice, though, that you do have to have your medical provider signed to certify it's true. You need to have the school administrator sign to verify it's true, as well as up here, your employer. So your employer needs to know that everything, or it needs to verify that everything you say is true and correct on that application. So that's the occupational license application. Now, another application here is something called a probationary license. Yeah, yes, Sandy.
Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know a lot of things are not allowed as violations.
Right.
So can you think of any that are allowed? Or is that
well, quite honestly, yeah, there's very few things that are allowed. Is if you get suspended for points. For instance, I'm going to go back here. The Pennsylvania point, this is another, if you're curious about points and what violations carry points, this is a publication that's also, you can search for this on Penndot's website. And I'm going to get to your question, Sandy, as I go through this, but you'll notice as you accumulate points in the second sheet, I'm going to jump ahead. These are all the violations, the vehicle code violations listed on the left, and then the points that go with them. Now, if points are accumulated, you can see listed here on the front, the first page, there are certain for first accumulation, second accumulation, there could be, for instance, a 15-day suspension, a third accumulation of 6, there could be a 30-day suspension, excessive speeding, if you're going 15 or more over the posted speed limit, there's a 30-day suspension. And then also down below, if you accumulate 11 or more points, depending on the number of prior suspensions you have, not just for points, but for anything, then they assess the suspension based on whether it's a first, second, or third, and you'll see if it's a subsequent, it's a year suspension. These types of suspensions, you're eligible for an occupational license. But for the most part, most of my clients who are suspended don't qualify for an occupational license. This is really an area that needs to be expanded because unfortunately, most people don't qualify. But it's because it's just very, very limited as far as who gets one. So more often than not, when people call me, the answer I give probably 99% of the time is, nope, you don't get an occupational license. Unfortunately, that's the case. Now, the other type of probationary license is something that's called a probationary license. Now, probationary license, there's an application on Penndot's website. Now, again, this is also not, unfortunately, not many people are eligible for this either, because in order to qualify for a probationary license, you need to have, and again, I'm going to bounce back here. You can see, what charts and what's available. And again, the probationary license frequently asked questions, but this is the application for it. But with the probationary license, you have to have a minimum term of suspension of 5 years. So if you're suspended for 5 years or greater, you may qualify for a probationary license. However, you can't have, click on this, you can't have any of these offenses within the previous 7 years. A driving under suspension related to a DUI, a refusal to submit to DUI testing, a driving under the influence, a aggravated assault, a serious violation. So if some of these will result in years of suspension, but you may be suspended for more than 5 years. However, if in the previous 7, you have one of these disqualifying offenses, you're not eligible to get a probationary license, or if you have less than 5 years. So that's kind of an issue there. Now, the other thing with a probationary license is, where's my FAQ? But the other part of the probationary license is you're not eligible right away because you have to serve a minimum of 3, 4, 6, or 7 years. So as required by law, you may have 5 or 6 years worth of suspensions, but you have to serve a minimum term of suspension, meaning you have to go that period of time without driving. And depending on the number of violations you have, it could be 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 years. So even if you have greater than 5 years worth of suspensions, you still have to go a minimum of 3 years before you can get a probationary license. And then it's the same scenario. Now, the nice thing about, as far as application goes, we have the same similar, vehicle insurance. Now, the nice thing about a probationary license is you're allowed to drive a lot more. It's basically sun up to sundown, and you are really unlimited in your driving. And what is a probationary license? So it allows you to drive. Now, you can only get these once, once in a lifetime, but it really allows you to drive a non-commercial vehicle between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. Oh, there's the dog barking. But PennDOT may give you additional hours, is listed right here, if you need. For instance, if you're a third shifter, you're working midnights, well, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. doesn't do you much good. So PennDOT can give you more hours. But a nice thing about a probationary license, if you qualify and PennDOT gives you one, as long as you don't have any violations, after I think 5 or 6 years, it turns into a regular driver's license. You get restored, but that's a lot of suspension. So I see very few people who also qualify for a probationary license. So the two probationary licenses, occupational license and probationary license, unfortunately, not many people, qualify, for those types of those licenses. So unfortunately, most people don't have the benefit of that. So that's where the restoration letter is important, because that's going to show exactly, what's showing up on your, on your license and on your record that need to be cleared up. Now, there's also, if you have a driving under the influence, a DUI suspension, there's a new probationary license called Ignition Interlock Limited License. Now, we always had ignition interlocks in Pennsylvania. Well, not always, but for as long as I've been practicing law. That's the device you hook up to your ignition. You have to blow into it, provide an alcohol-free test in order to start your car. Now, the law used to be that if you had a DUI suspension and you got convicted, you'd be able to get an ignition interlock license at the end of your suspension. The Ignition Interlock Limited License is a new license. It's only been around for a couple of years, only applies to DUIs. But if you're a first-time DUI offender, you're going to lose your license for a minimum of a year. you can drive during that year with the ignition interlock license. If you are a second or third time multiple offender DUI, you're eligible to get that ignition interlock license halfway through your suspension. So you don't have to serve the entire suspension, then get the ignition interlock license. So that's one of the pluses to that, is it accelerates people driving who have a DUI suspension, as long as they have the interlock device in the vehicle. Yes, Sandy.
So do the does Penndot provide you with one of those interlock devices for free?
No, not at all. That was my next, I was about to say, they run about $1,500 a year. Now, what happens is in Dauphin County, you have to go through Dauphin County probation for the device. Anywhere else in the state, you call one of the vendors. The Pennsylvania DUI Association has a list of vendors per state, per county, but you have to contact one of those vendors who then puts it in your car. And then once it's in your car, then you make application for the license. And then Penndot has up to 20 days after they get your petition to give you the license if you qualify. You always want to make sure you qualify before you start the application process, because you have to pay to have the device installed in your car, which is expensive also. But those are the types of things. 15, yeah, actually, I did say 1,500, roughly 1,500 a year. And that, again, that varies per provider. It is, it is private industries who are running those in most situations. So it's what they charge. Some places give out coupons for a month free or free install. So there's other things like that out there. If you have a DUI and you're a first-time offender and you get into the first-time offender program called the ARD, Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition, you're likely facing a 30, 60, or 90-day suspension. Under the new law, you can drive during that period of time as long as you have ignition interlock in your vehicle too. And that's going to cost you about $450, roughly $500 for that short period of time too.
So you're only renting the device? Is that how it works?
Oh yeah, you wouldn't want to buy one of those. So yeah, you're basically renting the device. And the reason why is the device has to be calibrated and tested on a monthly basis. So you have to go in and the company has to run diagnostics on it. There could be problems with it if you provide a sample or if it times out. It could be quite a hassle. But yeah, you're renting the device and they're maintaining it. That's part of the expense too. But these are the types of things that we see coming up, in these circumstances. So when people come in, when they come into one of our clinics, we always make sure that they come in, and we started this where we're perfecting the way that we're doing these clinics. But now we started with people coming in with the restoration letter already prepared. That way we can get one of our trained attorneys to sit down, look at that restoration letter, and be able to get a pretty good idea of what needs to be done. For sometimes though, the restoration letter is not always beneficial because of a probationary license. The probationary license, we have to know the total term of suspension being served, and the restoration letter only shows the current and future suspensions, not suspensions already served. So a person may be 6 years into a 10-year suspension, the restoration letter would only show the next 4. So there are situations where if someone wants to potentially qualify for a probationary license, we need to get a driving record. Penndot charges, I think, $10 for that. So you will have to pay. You can get that on the Penndot's website, give them a credit card, and you can print out your driving record right from their website. But sometimes the restoration letter is not enough. It's a good start. But more often than not, I'd say the restoration letter tells us what we need to know to give that person the advice. So when they come in to see us at the clinic, they walk in with the restoration letter, we sit down and we assess their situation and help them out. And that's the key to determining when they're going to be restored, what needs to be done whenever they're restored, and what potential probationary licenses may be eligible for that person. So that's basically the points I wanted to hit today. Sandy, do you or Ashley or do any of our attendees have any questions that, I guess at this point, if we want to stop the recording, or if there's any questions, I guess, before we go to personal details, Sandy or Ashley?
Yeah, let me just ask. So sometimes it's, a reason you can be suspended in your driver's license is because you've had an accident and you owe money because of that accident. So, Ed, how do you clear up that? Say, say it's only $2,000 and you can actually pay it. Right. And then the other situation, what if you can't pay it? What do you do?
And that's a great question, because we will often see people come in with those judgments. Obviously the best thing you do is, if you have the money, pay off the judgment. Because if you clear it, then the Probationary's office, first thing you want to do is you want to find out how much the judgment is. You can usually, when you pull the restoration letter, it will normally say the amount of the judgment. And if it doesn't, it'll tell you what county's Probationary's office you need to contact, and it'll often have a docket number. So you can call the Probationary's office, provide them the docket, and they'll tell you the amount. They will also tell you who the debtor is. Who do you owe the money to? Sometimes it's an insurance company, and this only applies to auto accidents. If your landlord sues you because of damage, this doesn't, it's only if you had an auto accident and there's an outstanding judgment. Then by contacting the Probationaries, it will tell you the amount and who you have to pay. Sometimes it's the other party's insurance company, sometimes it's the other party. But what can be done is you can satisfy that judgment by paying it off, or there are oftentimes you can work out a payment plan with either the other party, the other party's attorney, or the insurance company. And once you get on a payment plan, if you owe, I've had clients with $15,000, they don't have the money. But if we can get a payment plan set up, that will allow them to start making payments. So what I always tell the insurance company is, we're kind of in a catch-22. You want my client's money, my client can't pay you without a job. Client can't get a job without a license. So you give us a break, let my client get their license, start making payments, get back to work. You'll see your money, my client will get to drive. But make sure if you're dealing, I would be very careful dealing, of course, directly with the individual, because you want to make sure it's in writing and you everything covered. The insurance companies, the opposing attorneys, of course, you're still going to want to get it in writing. Sometimes you could find that if it's I had one case, I think it was a 20-some-year-old case where the person was deceased, and we just had to file a precipice with the court to close it out. But there are actions that could be taken to make that go away. Yep.
You did. So after you pay, say I owe Joe Smith, the $2,000 on a car accident, and I, get to Joe Smith's house and bring the check, how do we let Penndot know about that?
Then that's going to be up to either the Probationary or the person who has the judgment to take care of that. So that's why you're going to make sure that you're on top of that.
Oh, so when you go over to their house to pay,
well, that's why, yeah.
Okay, you need to also contact the courthouse and let
And more
them
often
know.
than not, you won't be dealing with the person. You'll be dealing with the insurance company or the attorneys.
Okay.
But yeah, you want to make sure they follow up with notifying Penndot.
That makes sense.
Get receipts, get paperwork, do everything else.
And you had mentioned at the restoration fee itself. Do you know roughly, is that like $500 or $5,000?
Well, it depends. Generally, the lowest restoration fee is about $76. But if you have a commercial driver's license, it could be up to $200. If you're arrested for DUI and you refuse to give a breath or a blood sample, the restoration fee can be anywhere between $500 to $2,000, depending on whether you've refused in the past. If you have a third refusal, it's $2,000. A second refusal, it's $1,000. The first is $500. But yeah, that's an issue. Is very, very high restoration fees there.
Wow. So you're saying if you have a commercial license, we get a lot of calls on our lawyer referral ed from people who are truck drivers, commercial truck drivers. And so they can follow all these steps as well. There's not a whole separate system. Right.
Nope. All that information will be spelled out on the restoration letter, including CDLs. CDLs is a disqualification. As opposed to a suspension. They just call it a different thing. Okay. Suspend your driver's license, disqualify your privilege to drive a CDL, but the restoration letter will contain information on both of those.
Okay. And so when you were saying about checking your driver record, is that the same for a CDL too?
Yes.
You can go online. Yes. And as long as you have your driver's license number, birth date, and last four of your social,
right,
you can go to Penndot's website and check your driver. So
exactly.
Hypothetically, a parent who was nervous about their kid or something could check their kid's license.
Well, here's where you got to be careful. Let me go back to sharing screen again, because this is something where we make sure if you look at the restoration letter, and I'll get there in a second, it says right here on in the bottom, I certify
Oh.
under penalty of law that I am accessing my own driver vehicle information, or I have written authorization from the driver record holder to access that. I understand any misstatement is a misdemeanor of the 3rd degree. So if you want to check on your kids, can it be done? Of course it can be done, because it's just a matter of clicking. However, you have to click on that box that says I am certifying under penalty of law, I am accessing my own. So that's where you got to be careful there.
Yeah. I wasn't going to do that, Ed, by the way.
No.
And I know when we're at the clinics, we have a form that we actually ask folks to sign,
Yes.
just so we know
Yep.
that we have their permission. And
Right.
yeah, that's actually true. And I don't know if you want actually to turn off the recording, but so what prevents someone from no, I'm just kidding. I think we're okay, but Ed will tell me. What prevents someone who has that ignition interlock device from getting a friend, you know where I'm going with this, Ed, from getting a friend to breathe into their little device?
Because as they continue to drive, it will require them to get multiple samples as they're driving down the road. So it's not a once and done. It'll prompt them to.
Well, you got your buddy next to you. You got your buddy.
Well, then why isn't your buddy driving? So that's why. Yes, there's nothing to prevent you from having your 16-year-old kid sitting on the seat next to you while you do it. But no, it's not. It's can the system be beat? Of course it can, but you run quite a penalty if you get caught with your 16-year-old or your buddy, blowing into the device. So,
or yeah.
The penalties are not worth it.
No, and I bet that if you get busted for cheating the system, if they pull you over, if you have an accident and something happens.
If you get caught doing that, it's considered driving under suspension related to a DUI, 60 to 90 days in jail, $1,000 fine, another year suspension, another year ignition interlock. It's not worth it.
Right. That's important to remember.
Yep.
So, Ed, how often do you find that folks don't know what their reason is for their suspension, or don't know the background on their case?
Well, I think everybody, I would say probably about, I'd say probably about 95% of the people who come into our clinics don't know. I have some people, every once in a while, I'll get someone to come in and we'll sit down and we'll tell them, well, here's your restoration letter, and, hey, you're out of luck. There's nothing we can do for you. And then, sometimes they'll get, I had one person, wait a second, this is a restoration clinic. I'm getting my license back. I already knew everything you told me. And they're like, well, hey, that's just, so yeah, some people come in already knowing the answers, and they're just hoping we can perform a miracle, which is why I tell them at the beginning, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
But most of the people don't know. We've had people come in and, they were under suspension for years, not realizing they just had to run over to the local judge's office and respond to an old ticket. So we've had some really good success stories with easy and quick fixes, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately, for everybody. But it's been beneficial, and most of the time it's just people need to know. They need to have that answer because they're not familiar with navigating the system, and just something as simple as finding out how to request a restoration letter and having that nice chart in front of you, the roadmap to get you started and get you moving in the right direction is very beneficial.
And Ed, is it still the case that your suspension doesn't actually start until you mail your?
No, that changed. That changed back in October of 2018.
So that's good, right?
Yeah, in the past, if you didn't surrender your license, your suspension would never begin. Finally, the legislature changed, and now, since October of 18, suspension begins when PennDOT says it begins, regardless if you surrender your license or not.
So even though it's tough to get a bread and butter license or limited license, I think sometimes people call it that, or that probationary license, at least they fixed one loophole, and maybe there'll be some hope for the future. Much like our clinic who works with folks on expungements of criminal records, hopefully in the future, government leaders will understand that a driver's license is needed for most jobs, and that, a limited license might be appropriate in some cases.
Yeah, we're working on that.
Okay.